It was a quiet morning in Louisville, Kentucky, the city known for its bourbon, its horse racing, and the massive UPS Worldport, one of the busiest air cargo hubs on Earth. Every night, hundreds of planes land and take off here, carrying parcels and packages to every corner of the globe. To most people, it's just another night of operations. But for one UPS crew, that night would end in tragedy, and for investigators, it would raise haunting questions about whether the same mistakes were happening all over again. The flight in question was a routine cargo run, nothing unusual. The aircraft, a UPS Airbus A300, was inbound from a regional sorting center carrying express freight bound for distribution at the Louisville hub. Inside the cockpit sat two experienced pilots, both well-trained, both trusted by the company, but as the aircraft approached Kentucky airspace, something began to go wrong. The night was thick with humidity, the kind that hangs over the city like fog. Thunderstorms had rolled through earlier, leaving behind low clouds and patches of mist that reflected the runway lights like mirrors. Air traffic control was directing a steady stream of UPS and FedEx jets into Louisville's parallel runways, coordinating arrivals in precise 2-minute intervals. For controllers, it was business as usual until this particular A300 checked in. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The pilots received vectors for the approach and began descending toward the airport. But as they started configuring the aircraft, a subtle series of errors began to build. The captain, an older pilot with thousands of hours on Airbus aircraft, was mentoring the first officer, who was newer to the company but eager to prove herself. Fatigue was a factor. They had been flying all night, part of a schedule that left little room for rest. As they reached the initial approach fix, the autopilot was engaged, and the flight descended into the soup of clouds surrounding Louisville. Visibility dropped, and rain streaked across the windshield. The cockpit voice recorder later revealed calm, focused voices at first, but then a call-out was missed. A speed was not cross-checked. The glide slope was armed too early. Tiny cracks forming in a chain of errors that, when combined, would soon turn deadly. The aircraft was cleared for the ILS approach to runway 26R, the primary arrival runway for cargo operations. The captain called for gear down and flaps, and the aircraft stabilized, or so it seemed. But what the crew didn't realize was that their vertical path was slightly below the proper glide path. They were descending too quickly, and at night, with no clear visual reference to the ground, their perception was deceived by the dark terrain below. At about 1,000 feet above the ground, the first officer called out the altitude, but neither pilot noticed that the descent rate had increased. The ground proximity warning system began to sense danger, but only a moment later, the alarms would blare through the cockpit. "Sink rate," the electronic voice shouted. The captain responded instinctively, pulling back slightly on the controls, but the reaction came a fraction too late. The A300 was descending at over 1,500 feet per minute, dangerously steep for a stabilized approach. Then came the impact at 4:47 a.m. The UPS freighter slammed into a grassy field short of the runway, breaking apart as it slid through trees and debris before bursting into flames. The impact was violent, instantaneous, and fatal. Both pilots were killed. Fire crews raced toward the site, their sirens cutting through the early morning darkness. For the people living nearby, the sound was a jarring shock. Some had seen a bright orange flash. Others heard a deep, dull thud that shook their windows. Within minutes, the crash site was engulfed in flames, the remains of the aircraft scattered across a wooded ravine, less than half a mile from the runway threshold. As the smoke rose over Louisville, the question began to spread through the aviation community. How could this have happened again? Because just like before in another eerily similar crash years earlier, the same type of aircraft, flown by another UPS crew, had suffered a fatal descent on approach. The parallels to the Birmingham crash of Flight 1354 were chilling. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board arrived within hours, working alongside UPS safety teams and Airbus representatives. The black boxes were quickly recovered from the wreckage. As they were analyzed, a clearer picture began to emerge: fatigue, workload, unstabilized approach. All the same factors that had haunted UPS years earlier were still present here. The NTSB found that the crew had been operating at the end of a long duty period, after flying through multiple time zones. Their circadian rhythm was inverted, flying through the night, landing at dawn, the body's lowest alertness period. It was a schedule UPS pilots had warned about for years, calling it the zombie zone. The cockpit voice recorder painted an emotional story. In the final moments, the first officer's voice revealed mounting stress. The approach was fast, unstable, and behind the airplane. They should have gone around, but fatigue and pressure to complete the flight clouded judgment. In the last seconds, they realized their fate. A desperate pull on the controls, a rising engine note, then silence. For investigators, the tragedy was not just about a single flight. It was a symptom of something larger: the systemic fatigue that plagued cargo operations, where pilots often worked nighttime schedules that would be illegal under passenger airline rules. The FAA had introduced new rest regulations for passenger pilots in 2014, but cargo carriers had been exempted after industry lobbying. The reasoning was cost, but the result, critics argued, was deadly. When the NTSB published its report, the findings were damning. The probable cause: an unstabilized approach resulting from pilot error, compounded by fatigue and inadequate fatigue risk management by the operator. The report also cited inadequate training regarding approaches under high workload conditions. But the headline that followed in media outlets across the country struck a deeper chord. UPS crash raises familiar questions. Did it really happen again? Because for those who remembered the 2013 Birmingham crash, the similarities were undeniable. Same airline, same aircraft model, same type of approach, same outcome. And while the Louisville incident didn't happen in the exact same way, and some still debated the specifics, the emotional resonance was powerful. The public began asking, if we learned the lessons once, why weren't they applied again? Inside UPS, the aftermath was somber. The company has one of the most advanced cargo networks in the world, with an impeccable safety record compared to many carriers. But these back-to-back tragedies forced a re-evaluation. Management began working with pilot unions to reassess scheduling, rest periods, and training procedures. Simulator programs were revised to include high-stress approach scenarios, and new fatigue monitoring systems were tested. For the families of the two pilots, though, no procedural change could ever undo the loss. Both were described by colleagues as consummate professionals, deeply committed to safety and precision. In their final minutes, they fought to regain control, not out of panic, but out of duty. In the years that followed, UPS continued to improve its safety culture, investing heavily in cockpit technology and fatigue research. But the haunting memory of that early morning crash in Louisville remained a reminder of what can go wrong when even a small chain of errors goes unchecked. Some aviation analysts still debate the technical factors. Was it purely human error? Or were there underlying design or procedural issues? The A300, after all, was an older aircraft design, with cockpit ergonomics that differed from modern glass cockpit jets like the 757 or 767. The step from automation to manual control was sometimes abrupt, leaving room for misjudgment during critical phases like approach and landing. Others pointed to the systemic differences between cargo and passenger aviation. Cargo pilots often land in marginal conditions at smaller airports with less ground support, and they do it while the world sleeps. There are no passengers to complain, no media to film their arrivals, just pressure to deliver on time. And that pressure can subtly influence decisions in the cockpit. The UPS crash in Louisville was a wake-up call that the same dangers can reappear if vigilance slips. Aviation is built on layers of safety, but those layers are only as strong as the people, systems, and cultures that uphold them. In the end, it wasn't just about one plane or one night. It was about recognizing that the margin for error in aviation is razor thin, and that history has a way of repeating itself if lessons aren't truly learned. When the final report was published, it ended with a stark line that resonated across the industry. Fatigue remains a persistent threat in all-night operations. The families held memorials at the crash site, a quiet field now marked by a small plaque. Fellow UPS pilots visited on layovers, leaving flight caps and small model planes as tributes. For them, this wasn't just another statistic, it was a reminder of their own vulnerability, flying through the dark hours when the rest of the world sleeps. As the years passed, UPS transformed its safety programs. The company became one of the first cargo airlines to integrate real-time fatigue modeling into its scheduling software, predicting when a pilot might be too tired to fly safely. But even so, some pilots still whisper the question, could it happen again? Because in aviation, complacency is the most dangerous enemy of all. Every checklist, every approach, every single landing must be treated as if lives depend on it, because they do. In the end, the crash in Louisville was not a mystery, not an act of fate, but a culmination of small human errors magnified by fatigue and circumstance. It served as a painful but powerful reminder that in aviation, safety is never static. It must be fought for every single day. As the sun rises over Louisville now, the rumble of UPS cargo jets still fills the sky. Each one carries the legacy of those who came before, and the unspoken promise that their loss was not in vain. The pilots of that final flight may have gone down in darkness, but their story continues to shine a light on the unseen struggles behind the world's cargo lifeline. And while the official record will list the cause as controlled flight into terrain, the real message is one that echoes far beyond the crash site. No matter how routine a flight may seem, no flight is ever truly routine. Every pilot knows this truth deep down. It's the reason they double check every switch, every call-out, every decision. Because the margin between a safe landing and a tragedy is often measured in seconds, and in those seconds, judgment, training, and alertness are all that stand between life and loss. The UPS crash in Louisville stands as a solemn chapter in aviation history, one written not just in black boxes and reports, but in human stories, in lessons painfully learned, and in the enduring question that still haunts the night skies: did this really happen again?